Well, good morning, everybody. This morning I'm spending some time with Dr. Chris Kellner. Dr. Kellner, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I think to start off, could you tell us a little bit about where you're from and where you grew up?
Yeah, I grew up in California on the east side of San Francisco Bay, and there was, at the time, a lot of the farmland had been abandoned since the Great Depression, and it hadn't been reoccupied, so I had free access from my house a couple of miles to San Francisco Bay, so I spent a lot of time in my youth wandering over that abandoned farmland, and it had been reclaimed to, in early successional states. So I collected a lot of lizards and snakes, and my brother was into that as well, so it was a really good place to grow up.
That's awesome, yeah. Sharing with you, like when I was a kid, we did kind of a similar thing, right? We had little kiddie pools with braided sliders and different and soft shell turtles, and we had aquariums we got for free with different lizards and some snakes, much to my mom's horror, I guess you'd say. So tell me a little bit. So you found this interest at a young age, and then you go to college. Kind of walk me through your collegiate career a little bit.
Right. So yeah, I went to UC Berkeley. And I was a forestry major, and at the time I wanted to be a wildlife biologist. And so the forestry program was really good, and I thought it had prepared me for that. But then there was a hiring freeze when I graduated, and I had actually negotiated for a full-time permanent job. So, but the hiring freeze came, and so I decided to go to grad school. And so I went to Eastern Kentucky for my master's, and then my major professor there knew my major professor at the U of A, so I came to Arkansas and then majored in biology for my master's, and then for my PhD it was in zoology, and then I did a postdoc at Virginia Tech with Jim Carr. So
awesome, yeah. I was telling somebody the other day, everybody worth their how did I say it? Something. If you're worth your dirt, you came through Kentucky, because I was in Eastern Kentucky for a little bit as well. So you get done with your postdoc, and then what?
So actually, I was in the middle of the postdoc, and my advisor, my colleague, he was recruited to head up the environmental studies program at University of Washington. And so rather than follow him there, I looked for a more permanent job, and there was a job here, and I knew about Arkansas Tech because of my time at the University of Arkansas. So I applied for it and got it.
And here we are.
Yeah.
And so how long have you been at Tech?
I believe this is my 35th year.
So a little bit. So. A little bit. And I know I have a colleague at Eastern Kentucky that was one of your students.
Oh, right, Luke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaks very highly of you, by the way. So I think the kind of next thing I want to know is kind of what you're working on.
So right now I have two students, and they work on similar themes. So a lot of my work is focused on how habitat influences, or habitat management influences the species distribution and abundance. And so right now I have two students that are working on two different species, a Henslow sparrow, and grassland birds as a group are doing very poorly. The grasslands are really sought after habitat to convert to cropland, and so we've eliminated a lot of that habitat, and consequently the avian species that rely on it have suffered. And the other species is the cerulean warbler, and it is a forest bird, a very mature forest, and on very rich sites. So those sites, just like with the Henslow sparrows, they're sought after for timber harvest, and so that species is also doing very poorly. So the focus of both of those projects is on what we can do to manage the habitat to increase their use of the habitat.
Awesome. And then your students and you, so after this, the idea is to get this out there to help with management practices.
Right. Right.
Awesome.
Right.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit about your academic program you have, the graduate program that you're involved with.
So we have both thesis and non-thesis options, and both programs have been pretty successful. So I believe all of the students that I have had, and every student I've recruited except for one, the very first student I had came here, spent about a week, and decided it wasn't for him. But other than him, every one of my students has graduated, and they all have jobs, so that has been very successful. But I've also been surprised that a lot of the non-thesis students also have been quite successful. So both programs are successful. Currently we have 5 faculty, and we all have 2 or 3 graduate students. And we're all pretty active in publishing and trying to get our students to publish and to become very, very adept professionals. So,
what kind of courses are involved in the curriculum?
So we have several base courses and then a lot of electives. So in the base we have like a population dynamics class, and then we have research methods 1 and 2, and the research methods class I teach to really get students to be able to design and implement a research project. So I take them from development of the proposal to study design itself, how they should run their samples. We talk about sampling error and measurement error, type 1, type 2 errors, lots of statistical, there's a lot of statistical background that goes into that class. So yeah, and that's a challenge for the students. But I've had several of my students that have talked about how they really feel like that course itself has helped them in their career. So, and then they take electives. Some of them will take, most of them we try to get to take the GIS class, because virtually every job you have will require you to do some sort of geographic information. It's a mapping program that is very useful, and in fact, even just beyond the wildlife field, lots of people, lots of entities use it. The city of Russellville has it. If you're an airport, you have a GIS person. If you're a city planner, you have it. If you're in the fire department, it's virtually everywhere now.
Right. Yeah.
So
I guess before we wrap up here, if a student's interested in looking into our program, they can certainly get on the website. But is there any sage advice you'd say when somebody's looking at a graduate program, maybe in biology or fish and wildlife?
So yeah, contact the person you would be interested in working in, and look at their background to see what they've done. And so in our thesis program, every one of our students is working on a grant. So we have funding that allows them to go collect their data. And so we don't just recruit students unless we have a project. So it's not fruitful just to throw an application out unless we have a position. So yeah, I would encourage them to talk to the major professor. Now for the non-thesis program, that's not as necessary, because we have much more capability to cover those. They don't work on funded projects, although sometimes they help with the students that are working on a thesis. So yeah, so those 2 programs are kind of different in that regard. So for the thesis, you're working on a project very intensely, it's funded. For the non-thesis, you take a lot of courses, but then you also have some research practicum that you have to do. So it's not as intense as the thesis, but it does teach you how to collect data, how to analyze it, and how to write it up.
And I know for you and other faculty in that program, you are very busy on projects, on research, so no matter where the student is situated, they're going to have opportunities to get involved with research projects, and then even with classes too, right? It's like,
sure,
because I know that you've got undergrad students that are always looking for some help here and there as well. That some of your grad students have talked about the experience there.
Right. I like to have my students help each other so that they get experience not only on their own project but other projects as well. So and that's a good thing. And then also, yeah, for my courses, I take students usually on a week-long field trip somewhere. So We've gone to Big Bend in Texas. We've gone to the Gulf Coast a bunch of times. Forest ecology, I go to the Jones Ecological Research Institute and the Dixon Center, which is the Auburn Forestry Education Center, so they get that experience as well.
Yeah, so what I'll say is before we end is if you ever need somebody to tag along, please let me know. So.
Yeah, it's a good trip. Pretty intense. I'm always really tired when I come back though. It's pretty. So this year I have herpetology, so we'll go to the Dixon Center in Alabama, and usually we get up at about 6 o'clock. We get out in the field at about 7:30, and since it's herpetology, frogs and salamanders, they're active at night. The reptiles are active in the day. We go all day. We come back sometimes 10:30, 11 at night for 4 days in a row, and the students are always pretty happy to get back here and recover from that.
Yeah. Dr. Kellner, thank you. So Dr. Kellner, you went through a hiring freeze, and I think that isn't atypical these days for a lot of federal and state employment agencies. So for a student that's getting ready to graduate, or maybe looking at a grad program and thinking about 2 years or 1 year in the future, do you have any advice, or what kind of advice would you have for folks looking for jobs and looking to kind of step into that professional world?
Yeah, yeah, this is a tough time because there's so many federal jobs that are not available right now, and lots of our students are scrambling. So we actually talked about this in the seminar class yesterday. So, make as many connections as you can, and just because those federal jobs aren't available now, they may be available in the future, so there'll be an adjustment to that. But also look quite heavily in the private sector. So we have jobs as environmental consultants, and those jobs are not going to be affected as much. They'll be affected a little bit. And then there's quail forever and pheasants forever. Those are jobs. And then there are some private entities, National Wild Turkey Federation. So look in those, and then also look heavily at grad school. So what I did was when that job that I had been recruited for, when it evaporated, I said, well, I'll just go get my master's. And then when I was finished with my master's, the hiring, the opportunities weren't that much better than they were before, so I just kept going. I went for a PhD, so that's an option too. And I really, especially if you enjoy school, going out for a PhD can be quite rewarding, and you're in charge of your own project. So yeah, if you're academically inclined, I would encourage you to think about that. And the number of PhDs we have now in the wildlife field has declined, and that's because there were lots of really good jobs at the master's level over the last couple of decades. So I think a lot of people just decided, well, I'll get a job and go that route. So advice to the students: make as many connections as you can. I wouldn't avoid federal connections just because the job market is not that great. Look at the private sector to see if there's some jobs in that realm that are attractive to you. And if you're inclined academically, I would consider going on for a higher degree. So just when you get a PhD, you are usually paid. So it's not a great salary, but you can get by with it.
Right. You kind of mentioned this, so similar at a different time, I guess, but I completed my master's, and it was a significant recession at that time, and I did get a job doing urban forestry planning, but it was it was kind of the same thing. I was like, this is not the path I thought, and I was kind of in a position as like, do I go for another master's? And I was considering a master's in geography at the time, or a PhD, and got real lucky and had a PhD program that would fit within what I was doing with the state parks and whatnot. So definitely an opportunity to consider and keep on their radar as they move forward. And I've had, I guess, a follow up with that. When you think about a student that's preparing to go into a master's, you'd say this is kind of the things you need to prepare yourself for at an undergrad to go to a master's, and then the same thing with your master's program, what kind of advice do you give your students as they're preparing to say, I need to have publications or presentations or other experiences to kind of give them cutting edge in their portfolio for doctoral programs?
So the things that can set you apart are usually skills. And so, you know, if you pick a project that really trains you how to use geographic information systems, then you're not just limited to jobs in the fish and wildlife field, because geographic information systems are used so broadly in society. And so if you like that sort of thing, you can get a job, you know, with the oil, you know, industry, or, you know, with city planning, or with urban parks, or something like that, city parks. And that may allow you to, you know, keep your foot in the water, keep those skill levels up, and you can wait until the market in the fish and wildlife field opens up. So that is a skill that's extremely usable. It really opens a lot of doors. And then the other one is, you know, statistical analysis. There are lots of jobs that require data analysis, data informatics. And so if you're inclined in that direction, that will open up some doors. And really the only liability to that is the fish and wildlife field. You know, our salaries are okay. You can make a living, but they're not top tier salaries. However, if you have a GIS degree and you start working for the oil and gas industry, you'll become addicted perhaps to that salary, and it'll be hard for you to step away from it later. So that is a risk that you take. But you know, as long as you enjoy what you're doing, it doesn't have to be in the fish and wildlife field. So.
Certainly. One thing, as we were going through earlier, I was thought about to ask, and I got off track, but I know you're a birder, and I was going to ask, what about your favorite birding experience? Whether it's a certain species or the experience itself leading up to it.
Yeah, you know, I really like chasing birds. So, and that means if you're chasing birds, you're chasing rare birds. And so, right before this last weather event we had, a lesser goldfinch showed up right here in Russellville. And so, I think it was on Tuesday, right when the sleet was starting to hit, I texted a couple of my students that are pretty avid birders, and we went and chased it. So we got directions to the place where it was supposed to be located. We drove up and got out of the car. It took us about 5 minutes to locate it. So that's kind of rewarding. It's like the hunt, right?
Yeah.
So I like that. I remember the first time I saw a long-tailed duck, I got directions to it. I drove, and I was the only person there. You know, I drove up, and it was at Twin Bridges Park, and I got out of the car, and there was one bird on the water, and it was far enough out that I couldn't tell what it is by looking at it with my unaided eye. And I thought, well, what's the chance? And I put my binoculars on it, and it was it.
Yeah.
There was one bird there, and it was the bird I wanted to see. So, yeah, I really like just finding new species. And the challenge now is, since I've been doing it a long time, it's really hard for me to find a species I haven't seen before.
Yeah, you know,
So.
get a new one checked off the list, right?
Right.
Very cool.
So.
Dr. Kellner, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
I really
it's
appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Good morning.
Yeah, good morning.